Alrighty. I think it's working now. This is like my first time recording video about this. So anyway, welcome to the video. This is NR2003 setup tips and tricks and just general advice that, I've accumulated over, playing this game for four or 5 years now. So I'm so glad you clicked on this video. This is like my first ever YouTube video I've ever made. So if it's sloppy, please understand that. I'm sorry. So basically, anyway, let's just dive right into this. I'm just recording this on the fly rather than trying to like cut it all up, because editing video, 4K video can get really laggy because I'm playing the game in 4K because I got a 4K TV hooked up right now. And I thought, why not? So anyway, let's get this going. So essentially, we're going to talk about one big thing, one big tool that a lot of people overlook when they're making setups. They don't realize that it's important and they ignore it, but it's the one thing that really makes such a massive difference. So we're going to start with probably a track that's really good for building setups for, Chicagoland Speedway. And essentially, let's see, I created a test here. This is like a common setup that I see a lot of people, use. This is based off the fast setup. And if you don't know much about making setups, we'll even do that. This is just a setup I threw together a few minutes ago. Especially for Chicagoland, usually you see guys put the weight up near the front because they're trying to keep the car, from spinning out on them, make it nice and stable and stuff. But then, oh, it's tight, so they put in a ton of wedge down here. And that's the problem, because you're putting, basically, so let me back up. Tire heat. Let's go into our driving thing, the F4 box. On the bottom right, that is your most important tool for building long-run setups. Most people got their F2 box open or their F1 box, but your F4, that's the most important because that's showing you the heat of each tire. And that information is superimposed over here. Basically, you want your tires to hit about 180 to 200 degrees, and that's their optimal operating temperature. If they're too cold, they're not going to stick well. If they're too hot, they're going to be too slippery. And so heat after that point basically is a translation of less grip. So the hotter a tire is, the less sticky it'll be. But you want it warm enough that it's going to be, pliable and be able to stick to the racetrack. So basically, your goal is to get all four of these about the same heat. Now, obviously, they're sitting 138. That's just because these tires are, sitting on pit road. We're just idling. We weren't doing anything. And so, basically, what we want to do is, once these reach optimum temperature, we want all four tires to be about the same heat, but not quite. And I'll explain that in a minute. It's not quite a perfect balance, but it's close to being about the same. Because if one, let's say, because see right now with this setup, the problematic one, we put in a ton of wedge because we're trying to get the car to turn through the center because it's getting tight. And what's that doing is it's putting a lot of weight on your left front, right rear, and it's taking a ton of weight off your right front, which you think is good because then, oh, your right front won't get so hot. But it's also taking weight off your left rear. And your left rear and your right front work very well together to help make the car turn. And the problem is when you take weight off a tire using either your springs stiffness or your the heat with your weight bias, you're taking weight off it, that's going to cool the tire down. It's not working as hard. Basically, especially if your left rear gets cold, that's going to start to gain traction quicker than your right rear, and that's going to push you up the track. and that's going to make you tight, especially in the center off. So we're just going to take this test setup out. It doesn't have a lot of stagger on the tire pressure either. We're going to pull right out of pit road here. I haven't put very many laps on this setup, so I have not much clue how it's going to drive, but I'm pretty sure I'll know what it's going to do. And I'm going to do my best to make some competitive lap times with it. One thing you're going to notice is I'm taking it very easy at the start of the run, because right now the tires are still very cold and very brittle, and it's easy that, especially on an abrasive track like Chicagoland, it's easy that you can quickly overdo it and just grind all the rubber off while they're cold. So you got to take it really easy on those first lap or two. Get some heat in them, wait till they're starting to get warm and gooey, then you can start going hard. Alright, so now that our tires are starting to get up to temperature, I'm going to start running harder and harder lap times, trying to get as much heat as I can into these tires. And already, we're already starting to struggle. We have to come out of the gas. The car's getting tight. And if you look, it's because our left rear is very cold. It's not doing a lot of work at all. The less heat a tire has in it, the less work it's doing. We're basically right now driving with the two right side tires. We don't want that. We don't want freeloading tires. We want all our tires to be working for us. We don't want a tire that's just pushing us up the track, which is what the left rear is doing right now. That in turn is heating up our right front. Even though we took a ton of weight off it by putting in a lot of wedge, we're still making that tire work a lot harder. And I just clipped the apron there because I'm trying to talk and drive, but basically what we're doing there is your left rear isn't working as hard, so it's got all this grip, and it's just pushing you straight up the track and working this right front tire. So these two are working against each other. When you're turning left on an oval at 170 miles an hour, we have to get around that. So essentially what we're going to do is turn this setup into essentially what I've got here with my main Chicagoland setup, but we're going to show you how I'm going to show you how I get there. So essentially what we need to do is correct this balance issue, because we don't want the left rear freeloading, and we got to take care of our right front, and we got to get the right rear to be about the same temperature as the right front, maybe a little hotter, to allow the car to rotate, but we need this tire to work with us. So one thing to keep in mind is when you're going for your temperatures, basically the ideal range is this will be your coldest tire, and that's important because you still want it warm. 180 is fine, but you don't want it too hot and working it too hard, because then your right front's going to have to carry all the load later in the run. You want your left front to be a little cooler, so that as you're scrubbing it, as you're coming up the track, center off, you're applying the throttle, you're coming off the corner, that left front's going to be scrubbing, especially when you got, toe out, because that's what you'd run in an oval like this. And so you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it with that. I'm going to check. Okay, so that's basically, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and start by sliding the weight bias further back and taking out the wedge. We're just going to put it at 0. What that's going to do is that's going to put more weight on both rear tires, not just the right rear and the left front. What we want to do is we want to get this tire heated up as well, because we want both tires to be about the same temperature so that the car can rotate. So we're about 2/3 of the way back on that, and we're not doing any wedge. We're just going to throw that out on the track and see how that runs. I would use reshade right now, but for some reason it doesn't want to run in 4K, because if I turn it on, it looks great, However, I'm only getting 30 FPS because it's got like some internal cap somewhere that I can't turn off or something, or it just doesn't like 4K. The fact that this game is running at over 100 FPS in 4K on a pretty modern track is quite impressive. So already, the car is driving a lot better. It's a bit loose, but this is cold tires. Let's let the tires heat up and then see where we're going. Obviously, this is a bumpy track that requires a lot of patience getting into the throttle and being quite smooth. So right now, as you can see, our right rear is hotter than our right front, so the car is rotating through the center quite well. The only problem is our left rear, while it's a little warmer than it was earlier, it's still pretty cold. And so we're going to be driving great for a few laps, and we're going to think that we've got our setup nailed. However, quickly we're going to run into a problem here, because now our right rear is taking all that weight that we put on it, and it's the one that's carrying, that's heating up. Our left rear isn't heating up with it, and so we're just getting looser and looser and looser, and it feels like we're driving on two wheels. And that's because while we've slid the weight back, we're still ignoring an important aspect, which is body roll. As you can see in this view, we're losing a ton of right rear downforce because our sway bar is very soft. It's only at 1.4 inches, I believe. And so that's taking a ton of air off the right rear spoiler, and that's kind of lifting the left side tires off the ground, especially the left rear. And so the right front's still absorbing a lot of that. So basically what we need to do is, on these big tracks, I wouldn't run any smaller than 1.5 inches on your front sway bar. You don't want a rear sway bar at a big track like this. That's only useful on road courses in certain applications. So let's see here, we're going to just do that. That's going to help our body roll as well, increasing our front spring stiffness. And so now that we've done this, that's going to help our roll couple so that it keeps all four tires a little more balanced on the racetrack. So let's throw that out on there now. Now we're running 9th in practice, 30.5. That ain't bad for Chicago, but could be better. Let's get the tires heated up. Take it nice and easy. I think the reason why we're blowing past some of these AIs is just because they've been running out here for a while. We got fresh tires when we pull out of the pits. Now as you watch our F4 box down there, we're getting some information. So the car is driving a little bit looser now, and I just ran over that seam and spun the car out. But essentially, our left rear is heating up more with our right rear. We're a little closer now. This was about 200, and this was still at 170, and then it stopped heating up past that. But as you can see right now, there's a big difference on our left rear versus right rear springs. And that difference is showing up pretty well right there. So what we're going to do, we're going to increase our left rear spring to put more weight on that tire along with that one. We're going to see how that goes. Because our goal right now is we're just trying to get our right rear and our left rear to be about the same temperature, and we want it just a little bit warmer than our right front. because now that we've eliminated a lot of the body roll and the car is starting to keep all 4 tires on the ground better, and we're putting more weight on the left rear with that increase in the suspension stiffness, you can already see we're only about 5 or 6 degrees off on our overall temperature as the rear tires get up to heat. So we're going to stay out here and run a few laps because the car's going to drive really different when you pull it out of the pits on cold tires versus when it's got about 5 laps. That's a common mistake a lot of people make when they're building setups. They pull it out of the pits and they run 1 lap on cold tires and think it drives good, and then it starts driving terrible the rest of the race. It's because they're not setting it up to drive well once the tires are heated up. They're setting it up to drive well, you know, when they pull it out of the pits, and that's not going to work. You got to set it up so that it's driving good once your tires got heat in them. It's okay if it drives a little bit iffy on cold tires, but once they get up to temperature, that's when you want to start analyzing and figuring out where things are wrong. So you got to run about 4 or 5 laps. So our right rear is just a little hotter than our right front, but we're still having trouble getting our left rear to come up to temperature with us. Overall, the car is driving a lot better. We've got a lot more stability. We're rotating through the center pretty good, but it's still getting a little tight. And I'm fear that that tight condition is only going to build as we get further and further into this run. We only ran about 5 or 6 laps already, and it's already starting to get tighter than it was maybe 2 or 3 laps out of the pits. But we're still doing okay. I think we're still passing by all these cars because they got old tires, but so right now that our left rear has started to cool off a little bit, that's starting to heat up our right front again, and our right rear, you know, is cooling off a little bit. So now we're just starting to get tighter and tighter, and I gotta get way out of throttle on corner exit. And now we're struggling again. We're back to our same problem. So the next thing that we can do to help heat up our rear tires in general, because we're still colder than our right front, but also at the same time just get this balance corrected more, we're going to just go up to 450 pound stiffness on both of those. We're going to even out our track bars because you don't really need to mess around with too much, and if you run higher than 10 inches on an oval in these 2003 physics, you're going to run into some problems. So another thing that we need to do is, overall, we're about 20 to 30 degrees cooler on our left sides than our right sides. So we're going to increase our tire pressure here to about 51 on this side to cool those tires off slightly. And we're going to lower our left side tire pressure down quite a bit. We're going to increase the overall stagger between the right side PSI and the left side PSI. And then one other thing is, we're just going to increase our negative camber on our right front slightly. This is going to take some load off the outside edge and put it more on the inside edge of this tire. We've already got a pretty good balance, but I want to put it just a little bit more. And basically, you're going to always probably run this one at 6 or 7 degrees because there's no risk of over cambering the left front tire. But when you're talking about camber on a right front, it's pretty easy to get it to lean too much, and then it'll slip out from under it, and so you'll lose grip rapidly. So you don't want to go too much on the right front camber, just a little bit. About 2 to 3 degrees, depending on that. And that can make a big difference sometimes. You can pull out and the car's going to drive completely different, turn way better. But the big changes here that we're experiencing are, we've increased our stagger to put more heat overall on the left side tires compared to the right side tires, because we're trying to get this to even out a little bit more so that all 4 tires are going to be heated the same, gripped the same, and wearing the same. I'm going to actually restart the practice since I saw the timer was just about down all the way. So let's see how this goes. Obviously, we're going to wait a few laps because on cold tires it's going to drive completely different. We're going to get some heat in the tires, and we're going to see once they build to about their optimal temperature around 200, we'll see where that ends us up. So right now the car is already driving a lot looser than it has in any of the other times we pull it out of the pits here. And as you can see, that can be told to us not only by the fact that, you know, the car physically is driving looser, but we can see on the bottom right, our left rear tire is slightly hotter than our right front tire and right rear tire. But overall, we're colder than our front tires right now. And so that means that our rear tires have less grip than our front tires because they're hotter. Now we're about the same on the left rear, right rear, so it's evened out a little bit. And I'd say it's turning okay. This is an okay balance. I wouldn't be too frustrated if I had this set up right now and I was actively like driving it in a race. However, our balance right now, we're about 10 degrees hotter than our right front tire, which means this could get really loose really quick because we're going to chew up our rear tires here further and further we go into the run. If you look at our F5 box here, we're already taking a ton of rubber off our right rear tire especially. We'll keep running some laps and we'll watch that number start to balance out because we've only ran about 5 laps now. That could change in 10 laps, 15 laps. And that's really where you go for building long run setups. You're trying to get a repeatable pattern on as your tire temperatures build. And where does that balance finally even itself out? A little loose, and I fear it might get a little too loose in traffic. Already our left rear is getting pretty hot, and getting it above 220 isn't necessarily a huge problem, especially on a hot slick racetrack like Chicagoland. But see, now we're getting really hot on our rear tires compared to our front tires because this track has a lot of heat in it, and that's the problem. See, now we've overdone it. Now we've shifted it too far to the rears and we're not working the front tires enough to help us, you know, maintain some of that stability. And I don't mind driving a really loose race car, but obviously in traffic that can become a mess when you're trying to pass cars in 2-3 wide. Another thing that's going to affect our tire temperature is which groove we're running in. So I'm going to run kind of on this seam up here. We're going to see after a few laps how that affects the temperature of our right front, especially in relation to our rear tires. I'm going to have to move down because these guys are in the way. Sorry, Cindric. Kind of cut right in front of him, now he's in the wall, the AI. Because I was trying to just strictly run the high grid there. But now, our rear tires have cooled off quite a bit, and our right front's starting to come up to temperature with it. So, the differences in grip level from bottom to top, especially in NR2003 on these tracks, is going to affect it. But now we jump down to the bottom, and our rear tires heated right up, and the thing snapped around on us. So, we can tell overall, especially when we're running the bottom, that we've overdone it on the rear tire heating. One thing I observed too was basically our left front is still pretty cold. Now obviously all this camber is going to help that a ton, but there's things we can do to increase front downforce to put a little bit more pressure overall on the front end, and that's going to help even this out slightly. Now, increasing tape is going to loosen you up quite a bit if you're not careful, but we're just going to go forward on this a hair, 2 or 3 clicks. We're still not putting any wedge in. We're going to lower our left front pressure more to put more heat into there, and we're going to increase our left rear pressure. We're not going to change anything on the right side yet, because what we're trying to do is, if we change one of these things, it's going to affect the other side of the car. So I feel like if we can cool this tire off just slightly, that's going to help balance out the right rear as well. Because if we're loosening it up too much because left rear's getting hot and we're slipping, you know, as we put the power down on the left rear in the center of the corner, you know, if we're slipping on that, then we're going to struggle, and it's overall going to kick the back end out and wear out the right rear prematurely. There's a lot of indirect tire wear that comes from other tires not wearing or getting too hot and wearing too much that you have to keep in mind. I thought I was legitimately clear of Kyle Busch when I was looking in my mirror there. Okay. I did not get enough sleep last night. Where's Briscoe? Locomotive. Another thing that's going to help you on most intermediates that I haven't talked about yet is really making sure you lift early. So I'm going to lift way back here, because what that does is now the car is easy and situated. We can put the power down in the middle of the corner where the rear end is hooked up now. If we try to drive it really hard into the corner and lift late, then the car's out of shape until about the 2/3 point of the corner. If we do this, we're trying to get into the gas, car's not really driving good until about here, and by then we've chewed up our tires. So because the car is working the hardest, especially the front tires, they're working very hard on corner entry to turn the car down. If you slow up your entry quite a bit, that's going to help you a ton, because you're taking a lot of load off your front tires, and that's going to help you a lot in long run speed, making sure you lift really early. Because that's also going to help the rear end especially feel more hooked up, because you're able to apply throttle quicker, get into the gas quicker, and that's going to overall help your lap time a ton. And I am dragging the brake slightly as I enter the corner. Not a whole lot, but just enough. And as you can already see, our rear tires aren't getting, you know, excessively hot. And they're just a little bit hotter than our front tires, which is really good. We've struck a pretty decent balance, but it's a little snug. So I fear that it might build tight later on in the race, but our left front is starting to get, you know, more in the 190 range, especially on that edge there, which is good to see, because we were trying to get our left front to heat up more. We're going to keep running a few laps, because I feel like we've gotten pretty close to what we need for a setup. Maybe the right rear is just a little cold still. Might want to heat up the left rear a touch. But we're getting really close, and we're already running pretty competitive lap times. So I've been taking it pretty easy. I guess that's why the thing is down there, and we're on 100% opponent strength, but we're still blowing past these guys. I think it's fresh tires. Pick a lane, Yaley. Especially on these multi-groove tracks too, you're gonna start moving yourself around to look for more grip. Yeah, see, it's already building tight again. We didn't do a whole lot. Now it's, so we went too far on our changes again, as you look in the bottom right there. So 25, we went from 23 to 25. So we're gonna go back down to 23.5. We're still not quite where we want here. 199 is close, but this inside bead isn't quite where we need it. So we're going to go down even further on that tire. And then we're just going to put a little more heat in our right rear, because last time we did this, we only changed the left sides. We're going to change the pressure on the right sides as well this time. And we're going to see how that puts us. I'm actually going to restart the practice session so the AIs have fresh tires with me, so that we're a little more even and I can race them with a better gauge of understanding, you know, how fast I am in relation to them, rather than just going off of, you know, lap times or thinking, well, I'm blowing right past them. And it's like, yeah, 'cause they got a lot older tires than me, because I just pulled out of the pits and they've been already out there for 40 laps. So just one of those things that you got to keep in mind when you're in the practice too, is what are your tires at compared to the AIs, especially on an abrasive track like Chicago. Another thing around Chicagoland, especially in Atlanta and other abrasive mile-and-a-halfs, go slow to go fast. You don't need to be mashing the throttle really quickly. You got to kind of take it easy in the corners, especially, just patience, waiting a little bit extra longer than you think you should to get into the gas again. And then building a rhythm. That's going to take care of your tires a lot. Just being smooth and rolling through good corners, that's going to help you a ton with long run speed. We're almost at the balance we want. We're racing pretty competitively with the AIs on similar tires. Our left rear is just about the same temperature as our right rear, which is just about 5 degrees hotter than our right front, which is really about the balance you want on most tracks in NR. You can go a little higher than that, but you're going to run the risk of it getting too loose too quick, and then, you know, it's only getting looser and looser from there. So we've already taken quite a bit of rubber off the right rear again, but that'll even out pretty quickly with where our heat is. And pretty quickly we should see the left rear start to wear out with that. So I'm going to actually run a bunch of laps here around different grooves of the track just to put it through its paces. Let's see, we've ran 4 laps so far. Okay. I'm going to kind of go hard up here by the wall and really try to put a ton of heat into these tires and see what's going to happen if I try to drive it hard. Because now that we're on a surface that theoretically, because of the track on and I, will have more grip on it, that's going to cool off our right front tire a ton compared to running the bottom, which has less grip. That's going to heat up our rear tires. So grip level, overall where it's at, is a good thing to keep in mind, especially on ovals. This is on 100% difficulty too, so the fact that we're running 20th already is pretty good, because usually I race them at 97, 98. But to be keeping up with Kyle Busch at 100 is pretty good. But our right front's already starting to get a little hot compared to our right rear. Just because we're going so much harder on the tires around the wall. That's why you really don't see people move up there until it's very late in the run and their car's getting too loose on the bottom. So I think if we jump back to the bottom for a few laps, we should see that balance shift again, just because of how the tire heating works. So I'm going to run about a few laps, 2-3 laps on the bottom. We're going to watch the F4 box and see how that balance changes. So you're already building a ton of heat in the tires again, especially on the rear tires. This car is going to start to loosen right back up. Because that F4 box, again, is basically the status on how much grip each tire has. And that's the heartbeat of where the grip is in the car. That's what this whole video is about. Just watching that F4 box to understand what you need to do to get your setup to drive right. It's less about feeling, it's more about where that box needs to be. 51's taking all the air off my door and I got tight there, but anyway, that's how you can really dial in your setups on ovals for the long run. You're just constantly chasing that perfect balance of this being just slightly hotter, your left rear and your right rear being about the same temperature and slightly hotter than your right front. You want it maybe about 5-6 degrees, and that's going to change a lot during the run. So you got to keep an eye on that. Maybe make adjustments in the pits with a little bit of wedge, stuff like that. Mess around with this. I might have gone a little bit further back on that maybe. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shift gears literally, and we're going to go to a road course. We're going to go to Sonoma. We're going to go to Sonoma. Now, I don't know if it's a good idea to have it at 100% opponent strength, but we'll see. So this is basically, this is the fast setup, which I don't think is very good at all. You got soft rear suspension, kind of iffy suspension overall, especially on the sway bars, and, you know, pretty stiff front suspension for some reason. The thing on road courses is, it's a big, heavy stock car that you're driving around here. And so every time that you're struggling with, you know, putting the power down and the car wants to jump out from under you, or, you know, you're having trouble changing directions, you know, through S's, it's all because of weight transfer. So on road courses, it's less about tire heat overall, and it's more about controlling your weight so that it's not sliding around like a bunch of groceries in the trunk of your car that's, you know, flinging it around. Because you want your weight to stay in one spot so that there isn't weight transfer off the corner. When you hit the gas, you don't want the car to lurch backward, lift the front tires off the ground, and all of a sudden you can't turn because your front tires are, you know, in the air, and your rear tires, you know, are all of a sudden getting all this weight on, and now you're spinning the tires. You know, or you're coming around a sharp corner, you know, a right-hander, and all the weight shifts to the left side of the car. So basically what we're doing is we've got pretty soft front suspension because we want our front end to stay down, especially off the corner. And we've got these springs, the right rear and the left rear, maxed out. We've got them maxed out. We've also went up about 2 PSI on all the tires. And then our camber, since we know it's a track that has a lot of right-handers, we've changed this to positive camber. We've got negative camber here. Most people do -3 and -3 on both ones, and that would make it symmetrical. It doesn't matter. For me, personal preference, I just find this helps not only with the car not locking up the tires as much, especially because you want your brake bias around no higher than 65 on a road course. You want your brake bias between 60 and 65. Because you want your rear tires to help you, especially if you're trail braking a little bit through the corner, just to correct it and help the car turn just a touch by applying more braking to the rear tires. Anyway, we've got our weight almost, you know, near the back, pretty far back, about a quarter of the way up, and then 50-50 on our wedge and our left bias. Real tape, you know, doesn't matter. Gear ratio, as long as you're running the same as the AIs, you should be all right. So anyway, basically now we've built a platform for our car. We've got a pretty stiff sway bar. You could go up all that high, but I found this works really well. We're trying to prevent the car from rolling around too much and shifting in and out of the corners. So, you know, it can't transfer any weight to the rear when you put power down off a corner and mash the gas, because all that weight is already back there. And these springs aren't going to sink at all. And so, you know, it keeps it there, it also will keep the front tires from coming off the ground because the weight's already back there. It's not shifting back from the front tires, you know, lifting them up. The weight's already back there, so the front tires are already as low as they're going to be, and they don't come off the ground as much throughout the corner. That's going to help our turn a lot because we're keeping all 4 tires on the ground. Now I'm going to turn on auto shift for this just because I'm trying to talk and drive at the same time. I just don't want to have to think about what gear I'm in. But we're going to run some laps here. And, you know, I'm not a great road course racer, but I do have fun on them. And you're going to see just how well this car is going to navigate around this track. I mean, this thing feels like it's glued to the racetrack almost. It's snapping out, and that's just because, you know, these tires in NR2003 especially can get kind of brittle, especially on the Cup Series physics side of things. The CTS physics aren't so bad. But we're lifting really early, we're getting on the brakes quick, and then that way the car is stable and situated so we can hit the gas immediately on the apex. That's ideal. That's how you're going to maximize your lap time on road courses. Brake early, so you can hit the gas quicker right on the dead center of the apex. Back your corners way up. We've still got wheel spin. Obviously, that's just tire, you know, being brittle. The tire model in NR, the default physics isn't that great all the time. And I'm not necessarily going hard on this first lap because my tires are still pretty cold. But I was well before pit road and I started getting on the brakes for this turn. That already helped me quite a bit. So I can hit the gas right in the center of the corner there. And that's going to maximize my corner exit speed because I backed it up a lot. I mean, we're way far out from the corner. I got on the brakes. Now we're going to head down here and I can hit the gas right in the center of the corner and I can come clean off it. I'm not working the car that hard. Because if I barrel it in, then you're chewing up the front tires because you're trying to turn the wheel, get the car to turn. The car isn't situated, and then by then you're out of the corner already, and the car's finally got all 4 tires back on the ground. Now, I'm not good at driving in this view, but it's going to show you we're not getting a whole lot of movement on and off the corner, just a little bit. It'd be a lot more if you're using a default setup. It's not really rolling to the left or the right a whole lot. Just enough to be forgiving if we hit a curb. But overall, it's not doing that very much as we enter corners and change direction from left to right. That's really what you're going for in a road course car. This is what I do at almost every road course, and it works pretty well everywhere. One track that I haven't quite got the hang of yet is Coda, but for the most part, other tracks, like I've done this at Monaco, Laguna Seca, and it works just as great there. Works great at the Roval, Watkins Glen. We'll actually probably do the Roval here in a minute. I just nailed that curb there with my left front. Upset me a little bit there, but alright, we've done enough there. Let's do the Roval. So again, same idea, kind of soft springs. I'll actually go up about 2.8 there. Basically the same setup we had at Sonoma. Actually, we'll put it about there. The same idea essentially. Soft front springs and then stiff rear end springs, weight just about all the way in the back. Pretty stiff front sway bar. Brake bias between 60 to 65, and then just a little bit of positive camber on the right front because this is another track that has a lot of technical right-handers. So if you look at your track map here, this is very useful for determining which way you want your camber to lean, because essentially, if you think about it, there's a lot of left-handers. I think there's more left-handers than right-handers, and there's these big sweeping corners. But if you think about the left-handers, after those left-handers, you got to take it 2 corners at a time. So what's after this sharp left-hander? Another slow left-hander. You don't need to be going super fast out of this corner. That's not going to help your lap time because you're just going to have to slow down for this one. However, once you get into these, you've got 2 right-handers that are going to sweep you around and build you onto this long straightaway here and to another set of right-handers. You want to be carrying a lot of speed there. So if you sacrifice time on the left-handers, knowing that you're going to, the right-handers are all the ones that you need to do, pulling out of the chicane, you're turning right. Pulling out of this chicane, you're turning right, because this is a pretty straight curve once you actually go out onto the track. And so it's evaluating where are the fast sections of the tracks and what are the corners that you have to do before those sections. So I think, all right, yep, I got a setup loaded. We're going to pull right out onto there and start running some left. Now obviously this is a pretty slick racetrack compared to Sonoma in my opinion, especially the BBMC version of the Roval. So you got to kind of take it easy, and I might spin out once or twice, but overall if you just take it easy around here, the car will reward you. Again, I'm braking early so I can hit the gas on the apex, way behind the corner, and I'm getting into the brakes. Rolling through here, you don't want to hit the gas in that center straightaway part because you want to be able to get low for this corner and then this corner. And again, I'm really going to go slow here. That way I can turn all the way down here, put my gas down on the flat portion of the track where there's a lot of grip. That way I can get the power down early and have a lot of speed pulling out on the straightaway. I usually like to brake right at that Bank of America flag that hovers over the track just at the exit of turn 2. That's usually my braking marker for the rear chicane. Then my braking marker for the front chicane is right where this shadow starts. I start applying brake back here so I can roll down. Sometimes dip my left front tire in the grass there just to cool it off. And then I'm slowly applying power down until I'm coming out of that chicane because that left-hander is not that sharp as it looks on the track map. I don't want to gas it up on that straightaway because I've got another, slow left-hander coming. So essentially, yeah, we're doing pretty good on that track too with basically the same setup. So back to ovals, let's do Darlington. This is probably one of my favorite intermediates to drive, and I was actually there here in September this year for that race. That was a good race. Trying to remember which one it is. Yeah, I think it's this one. Unless it's... Alright, I believe this is the setup. So essentially, oh, I still got auto shift on. All right. So right, Darlington. And this is less about setup, and this is more about driving technique. Because this track is very unique in the way that no matter how good you get your setup, you're not going to be able to drive it with the steering wheel that much. Most of your driving is going to be done with the throttle. This is a technique that a lot of top tier drivers of the Gen 6 era had mastered quite well. This is even in the driving instructions video included with NR2003. So basically we're driving with the throttle more than we're driving with the gas. When we want the car to turn down, we come off the gas. When we want it to go up, we come back on the throttle. So, especially in that first corner there, because this track is egg-shaped and that's a greater than 180-degree corner, you know, that's where it can make the biggest difference in your long-run speed. So we're going to head back down in here and watch how the car starts to turn the moment I come off the gas. And I'm not putting a whole lot of wheel into it. And then I'm bringing it back up as I'm applying throttle again, getting up to the wall for a nice arc so that I can come off the gas, let it swing down, and get back once we're in the middle of that corner. That's how you're going to maintain competitive lap times around Darlington. It's less prevalent in 3 and 4, but it still applies. So another thing is too, you'll notice I'm coming across that apron on entry, and that's just going to help because I can start to apply the throttle down on the flatter portion of the track, and that's going to just help it overall with grip. Ah! I got nervous because Byron was behind me. I didn't know if he was going to drive into me or not. The car was getting a little tight. You can never be too loose at Darlington though, because it'll start to kill your overall long run speed if it gets, you know, way too loose. But anyway, just to illustrate again, make sure you got it. This is a big technique that'll apply to a lot of 1.5 miles, especially Auto Club in Michigan. Once you know this technique, it's going to change your way of driving completely. This is a very important technique to master, being able to drive the car with the throttle. Now this is still at 100% difficulty, so I'm guessing that's why the AIs are still going around me. But I gassed it up too quick there. Anyway, but yeah, learning the technique of driving so that you lift off the throttle and the car starts to go down, and then you hit the gas again, the car's going to move up. And you can point the car where you want it by using the throttle. I wonder if, ooh, no, where would it be? There it is. There it is. Let's see, I forget. So anyway, these videos are very useful. Very important. People kind of overlook it, but this is very important for building good good setups, especially because people overlook these, but they're very important. I think it's this one. It's either this or the 10th one.
Aren't won by the car that turns the fastest laps.
So we're just going to watch this because this is really informational.
Most of the time you won't have fresh tires. That car that handles like a dream with fresh tires can quickly turn into an ill-handling nightmare after just a few short laps if you don't know how to manage your tire wear. So how do you know just how conservative you should be? Well, a lot depends on the track. At some tracks, the tire wear is so low that you'll be able to do an entire fuel run on a single set of tires without breaking a sweat. At other tracks, the wear level is so high that you'll be wishing for fresh rubber after just a few laps. Other tracks fall in between those extremes. The key is to practice and find out. Try to drive fast, consistent laps, Open up your F5 box and note how quickly the tire wear drops off. From time to time, open up the F3 box to see how much fuel you've got left, so that you can get a good gauge of how your tires are wearing in relation to your fuel load. Once you've got a good idea of just how far you can go on a set of tires, you'll have a leg up on your competitors, and you'll be able to plan a solid strategy once you factor in the race distance. You'll also have a big advantage during a late race pit stop when others are agonizing over whether or not they'll be able to finish the race on their current set of tires. Tires aren't the only thing you'll need to manage while you're racing. You'll also need to pay attention to your fuel mileage. Not having to make a splash-and-go pit stop a couple of laps from the finish can get you a win every now and then. So how can you win the fuel mileage game? Well, just like it is with tire wear, knowledge is power. So you'll need to have a good feel for just how many laps you'll be able to run on a tank of fuel. Again, each track is different, so you'll just need to get out there and run until you're...
So anyway, I don't think that's the right one. I think it's this one probably. But there's a video where he's at Michigan Auto Club
part man, part machine.
where he's talking about the different tuning to illustrate, you know, how you can build good setups and then the driving with the throttle technique. One of these tracks, I don't know. One of these videos, he's basically, you know, and maybe this is it. Yeah, this is using the throttle and the brake as steering controls. This is the one. Because he goes to like Michigan Auto Club. I think this is Michigan, yeah.
If you've never played a Papyrus racing sim before, you may be in for a surprise the first time you get out on the track.
Because he's going to go over the technique of using the throttle and the brake to control your steering more than just putting wheel into it. This is very, very useful.
Overnight. First, you need a solid understanding of the basics, and that's where these driving lessons will help. Before we get down to business, okay, now it's time for some driving tips. The first one is very simple. Don't go too fast. This is a common mistake made by almost everyone. You've got to remember that in this game, you can't just hop in the car, mash the gas pedal to the floor, and have it steer like a slot car. Here, you're sitting on top of a 750 horsepower rear-wheel drive beast that has been modeled to behave as realistically as possible. So remember, just like when you first started driving for real, take it easy out there and pay close attention to how the car reacts to your control inputs. You'll want to start out at a nice wide track with long turns that will force you to let up off the throttle. Try Michigan or California for starters. The second driving tip is not as obvious, but it's important to understand. At high speed, the throttle and brake are used to steer the car. In normal low-speed driving, when the tires have plenty of available grip, the steering wheel controls the steering, and the throttle and brake control speed. But what happens when the speed increases to where the tires reach the limit of their grip? At that point, the car's rotation is controlled more by how much weight is on the front and rear wheels, not the steering angle. Braking will cause weight to shift to the front of the car, making it want to turn more. Applying the throttle will cause weight to shift to the rear of the car, making it want to turn less. Here's an example. As the car goes through the corner, we'll keep the steering angle the same, but we'll let up on the throttle. Watch as the car pulls to the inside. This time, we keep the steering angle constant, but we'll add some throttle. This time, the car pushes to the outside. When the tires exceed their grip limit and lose traction, the opposite effects occur. Too much brake will cause the car to plow forward and refuse to turn. Too much throttle will cause the rear of the car to snap around and spin. If you want to master car control, and you have to master car control if you want to win races, you'll need to properly anticipate these effects and compensate for them by using the steering wheel. For these reasons, it's important for you to be smooth with the steering, throttle, and brake. Just as you wouldn't violently jerk the steering wheel back and forth, don't jump on and off the throttle and brake suddenly. Instead, do what the pros call rolling into and out of the throttle and brake.
That's basically the biggest thing for getting the most out of any setup that you have in NR2003 is using the throttle and brake as steering. Obviously, the tire temperature stuff is just as important. Those are the two big things that will make a massive difference in how your car performs. And so, half of it is technique, and half of it is understanding that you know, with your setups, the F4 box can make a big difference. And that's usually going to tell you what's wrong with your setup. It's not necessarily, oh, it's driving like this, so I got to adjust this. It's looking at your F4 box to understand what you actually need to do and giving you direction. Oh, this tire's too hot. Oh, this tire's too cold. That kind of thing. So I hope this video, even though it's kind of long and boring and drawn on, I hope that you'll be able to understand some stuff from this. So, peace out.